A hero's mistake. Jack Carter was just another pilot in the vast darkness of space. His ship, the Starhawk, was small but fast, perfect for quick jobs between planets. He had no interest in war, politics, or heroism. All he wanted was a good payday. But that night, fate had other plans for him. As he drifted through the endless void, a loud alarm rang inside his cockpit. Distress signal detected. Jack frowned. A distress signal in deep space. That was never a good sign. It could be a trap. Pirates often used fake distress calls to lure in ships. But something felt different this time. The signal was weak, desperate. Against his better judgment, Jack tapped a button on his control panel. "This is Jack Carter of the Starhawk. Who's out there?" Static. Then a broken voice crackled through. "Help. They're coming. No time. Please." Jack's eyes narrowed. A real emergency. He couldn't just ignore it. With a sigh, he adjusted his course and sped towards the signal. A mysterious ship. After a few minutes, Jack spotted a damaged silver ship floating in the darkness. Sparks flew from its engines. Deep laser burns covered its hull. Someone had attacked it. Then his radar flashed red. 3 unknown ships were approaching fast. "Damn it," Jack muttered. Whoever sent that signal wasn't alone. As he got closer, his ship's scanners identified life signs. One person on board the silver ship. No time to think. Jack activated his communicator. "Whoever you are, I'm here to help. I need to dock now." The reply came instantly. "Hurry." Jack guided the Starhawk alongside the silver ship. As the airlock opened, a figure stumbled inside. The doors sealed shut, just as enemy lasers blasted through space, barely missing them. "Hang on," Jack yelled, gripping the controls. He pushed his ship to full speed, dodging left and right as enemy fire rained down. His engines roared, heat rising as he weaved through an asteroid field. The attackers were fast, but Jack was faster. With a sharp turn, he led them straight into a cluster of floating ice rocks. The enemy ships weren't so lucky. One crashed, another spun out of control. The third hesitated, just enough time for Jack to jump into hyperspace. They were safe. For now. The alien princess. Jack exhaled and turned to see his mysterious passenger. His eyes widened. She wasn't human. She was tall and slender, with silver-blue skin that shimmered under the dim ship lights. Her long, white hair framed a sharp, elegant face. Her violet eyes glowed faintly, filled with intelligence and fear. Jack had seen many aliens before, but none like her. She wore an ornate golden outfit, now torn and burned from battle. She was no ordinary traveler. "Who are you?" Jack asked. She steadied herself and looked at him. "My name is Alia, Princess Alia of Zephoria." Jack's stomach twisted. A princess. He had just saved royalty. That explained the fancy ship and the people trying to kill her. "You're in big trouble, aren't you?" he muttered. Alia nodded. "They are assassins from my own kingdom. My people believe I am dead. If they find out I survived, they will stop at nothing to kill me." Jack rubbed his temples. He was just a simple pilot. He didn't want to get involved in royal family drama. But it was too late. He was already in the middle of it. Nowhere to run. Before he could respond, his ship's systems flashed red again. "Warning! Unstable energy field detected." "What now?" Jack groaned. He checked the scanners. Something massive was pulling them in. A bright golden portal had appeared in front of them. Alia gasped. "No, that's impossible." Jack tried to change course, but it was useless. The ship's engines failed. The Starhawk was being sucked into the portal, like a fly trapped in a web. "Hold on," Jack yelled. The world outside twisted into a blur of light and darkness, swirling like a storm. The ship shook violently. Jack gripped the controls, but it was no use. Then, silence. When Jack opened his eyes, the ship had stopped moving. The alarms were off. Everything was calm. He looked outside and froze. They weren't in space anymore. Through the cockpit window, Jack saw a massive floating kingdom, a city of golden towers, glowing waterfalls, and flying ships. The sky was a deep violet, filled with stars that burned like diamonds. Elia's voice was soft but firm. "We are in Zephoria, my home." Jack's heart pounded. He had saved an alien princess. Now he was trapped in her kingdom. And he had no way back home. Trapped in the alien kingdom. The stars outside the cockpit of the Starhawk blinked like distant memories, disappearing into an endless purple sky as the ship glided through the strange, shimmering portal. Jack Carter's hands shook slightly on the controls, but his mind was in full alert. Where was he? How had he been dragged into this alien world? Before he could process it, the gravity of the situation hit him. The air was still, strangely thick, and something felt wrong. His ship was still functioning, but outside, the world had completely changed. The familiar cold void of space was gone. In its place was a land of impossible beauty, an alien landscape that stretched as far as the eye could see. Jack turned to Princess Elia, whose pale face seemed almost drained of color. Her glowing violet eyes flickered nervously, and she was gripping the seat with both hands, her knuckles white. She looked out the window, her gaze distant, lost in thought. "We're here," she whispered, almost to herself. Jack's voice was harsh as he spoke. "What is this place?" Elia took a deep breath. "This is Zephoria, my kingdom. I didn't think I would ever return here. Not like this." Jack's mind raced. He had heard rumors of alien empires, of hidden worlds beyond the reach of the human eye. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. The floating city, the glowing sky, it was all too alien. Jack took one last look at the exterior of his ship. He could see alien ships gliding overhead, their sleek, shimmering shapes almost too perfect to be real. They flew in formations, like birds in a strange dance. The air was thick with energy, crackling with an unfamiliar power. Elia's voice broke the silence. "The moment you entered Zephoria's atmosphere, you were bound to it. You cannot leave, Jack. Not without consequences." Jack shot her a confused glance. "What does that mean?" Before she could answer, a deep rumble shook the ship. A force field appeared around them, glowing bright blue as it pulsed. The ship jerked sideways as the sudden shift of gravity took hold. "We're being pulled in," Jack shouted. His ship was helpless, caught in some kind of gravity trap. He gritted his teeth, trying to maintain control, but it was like trying to steer a boat through a storm. Then the ship landed, its thrusters screaming in protest. The ground beneath them felt strange, unlike any planet Jack had ever been to. It was smooth, crystal-like, glowing faintly. The ship screeched to a halt, the doors hissing open. Jack stepped out cautiously, his boots clicking on the crystal ground. As soon as his foot hit the surface, he felt the weight of Zephoria's gravity pull on him. The air smelled different, sweet and metallic, like ozone. Elia stepped out behind him, her expression unreadable. She was already adjusting to the strange atmosphere. "This way," she said, motioning toward a massive stone archway ahead. The gate was decorated with alien carvings, symbols that Jack didn't recognize, glowing with a soft purple hue. It was like walking into an ancient temple, a kingdom that had existed for centuries. As they walked through the gate, Jack felt the eyes of countless alien beings on him. They were everywhere. Some wore elaborate clothing, others were armored, but all of them had glowing eyes, just like Elia. They stood still, watching, as if waiting for something. Elia's voice was low. "You are in the capital city of Zephoria. It's the heart of my kingdom." "Looks like I'm not the only one who noticed," Jack muttered, gesturing to the many aliens around them. He had the strange feeling that they were being watched. But Elia shook her head. "No, they're not just watching. They're waiting to see if I'll survive." Jack felt a chill. Survive. Elia's voice faltered for a moment, but then she steadied herself. The kingdom is in chaos. A coup was staged while I was gone. If I return, I'll either be crowned queen or killed. There is no middle ground. As they continued through the city, Jack noticed the shattered remnants of battles, broken walls, scorched buildings, and signs of destruction. There was a war happening right here, in this once beautiful city. But before Jack could ask more, the ground shook again, this time much harder. The sound of marching alien soldiers could be heard echoing down the streets. Elia tensed, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They're coming for us," she whispered. "The High Council. They will want answers." Jack didn't like the sound of that. He turned, scanning the crowd around them. There was nowhere to run. He was trapped. They both were. And whatever came next, it wouldn't be easy. Cliffhanger. Just as Jack and Elia reach a towering palace in the center of the city, the sound of heavy footsteps echoes in the distance. Jack's heart races. The guards are closing in. The trial of a human. The towering gates of the palace loomed before Jack and Elia like the jaws of some ancient beast, its golden spires twisting into the violet sky. The closer they got, the heavier the air seemed, filled with the weight of unspoken tension. Jack's boots clicked softly against the smooth stone walkway, but inside, his mind was racing. He had no idea what to expect. Nothing had gone according to plan since he saved Elia. Now he was in her world, surrounded by enemies, with no way to escape. Elia walked with purpose, her eyes straight ahead, but Jack noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted her cloak. She was trying to hide it, but it was obvious. The High Council was no small threat. "I should have known they wouldn't welcome me back," Elia muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was foolish to think I could just slip back into my place." Jack shot her a look. "You're the princess. They should be bowing down to you." She shook her head. "Not anymore. Not after what happened." Before Jack could press her further, a loud horn echoed through the palace courtyard. It vibrated in his chest, the sound deep and powerful, as though it had been designed to strike fear into anyone who heard it. The giant gates slowly creaked open, revealing an immense hall inside. The room was filled with alien nobles, their eyes glimmering like stars. They stood in silent formation, lined up along the walls like statues. At the far end of the hall sat a massive throne, surrounded by guards in shining armor, their faces hidden behind dark visors. Elia stepped forward, her chin held high, though Jack could see her hands tighten into fists at her sides. "Come on," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tension. "We have no choice now." Jack followed her, his nerves tightening with every step. His feet felt like they were dragging, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. As they reached the center of the hall, a low murmur spread through the crowd. The voices seemed to hum with dangerous energy, and Jack could feel their eyes boring into him. His palms began to sweat. This wasn't just some trial. This was something much bigger, and he had no idea how to play his part. From the shadows stepped forward an elderly alien, her skin like marble, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. She was draped in elaborate robes that shimmered with metallic threads, and her cold, calculating gaze fell upon Jack. "You bring this human here, Princess Elia." The elder's voice was like gravel, sharp, cold, unforgiving. "You know the law of Zephoria. Outsiders are not welcome. You have broken our most sacred rule." Elia stood tall, though Jack saw her shoulders tense. "He is not here to harm us. He saved my life." The elder's lips curled into a thin smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A life saved does not change the truth, Princess. You have brought a dangerous outsider to our home, and for that, you must face consequences." Elia's face remained composed, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't just a punishment for breaking the rules. There was something deeper at play here, something personal. "What do you suggest?" Elia's voice was strong, defiant, but Jack could hear the subtle tremor beneath it. The elder's eyes flashed. "You wish to defend him, then you shall face the trial of honor. Both of you. If he survives, he may be spared. If he fails, he will be cast out into the wastelands, never to return." Jack's blood ran cold. The trial of honor. He had heard whispers about it. The ancient test that decided the fate of anyone who entered Zetphoria. Only the strongest survived. But he was human. He didn't have the powers of these aliens. How could he stand a chance? Elia turned to Jack, her face pale. "You don't have to do this, Jack. We can find another way." "No," Jack interrupted, his voice more confident than he felt. "I didn't come this far to back down." The elder's eyes narrowed. "Very well. Prepare yourselves." Before Jack could react, the ground beneath them shifted, and a massive stone platform rose from the floor, carrying them high into the air. The room below them blurred as the platform ascended, carrying them to a massive arena above the palace, a coliseum of death. The platform finally settled, and Jack saw that they were surrounded by thick walls, their surfaces covered in ancient symbols. At the far end, a massive door slowly creaked open. From the shadows, a figure stepped out, a massive beast, towering over Jack. It was covered in dark, spiked armor, with glowing red eyes and sharp claws that gleamed in the dim light. "This," the elder's voice echoed, "is your first trial. You must defeat this creature to earn your life." Jack's heart raced, his hands trembling. He had no weapons, no training for this. He wasn't even sure how to fight it. And then, the beast charged. Cliffhanger. Jack barely has time to react before the beast leaps towards him, its jaws snapping like a ravenous monster. He is not prepared. Elia shouts for him to run, but it's too late. Surviving the impossible. Jack's heart raced as the creature's monstrous form loomed closer, its glowing red eyes locked onto him with the hunger of a predator. The air hummed with tension, and the roar of the beast echoed off the walls of the arena like a thunderstorm on the horizon. Jack's instincts screamed at him to run, but there was no time. The beast's jaws opened wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, its claws scraping the stone floor as it lunged forward with terrifying speed. "Move!" Elia shouted from the sidelines, her voice barely audible over the chaos. She was helpless, locked behind an energy barrier at the edge of the arena, but her face was filled with desperate concern. Jack's survival instinct kicked in. This wasn't a battle he could win with strength alone. He needed to think. Fast. With a sharp twist, Jack rolled to the side just as the creature's massive claws clashed through the air, missing him by inches. The ground cracked beneath its weight as the beast turned, its eyes blazing with fury. Jack was no fighter. He had no superhuman strength or alien powers, but he had been in tight situations before, dangerous ones. His military training kicked in as he scrambled to his feet and reached for anything that could help him. His eyes darted around the arena, scanning the stone walls. The creature howled again, a terrible sound that shook Jack to his core. He had seconds, maybe less, before it came for him again. That's when he saw it, a series of ancient weapons mounted on the walls of the arena. Spears, swords, and shields, each glowing faintly with strange energy. Jack ran for them, dodging another swipe from the beast's claws. His breath was ragged, his legs screaming from the effort, but he made it just in time. With a swift motion, Jack grabbed a long, glowing spear from the wall, its energy crackling at the tip. He felt the weight of it in his hands, the familiar feeling of a weapon grounding him in the moment. He wasn't about to die here, not today. The beast roared, charging again, its fangs bared. Jack had one shot. As the creature lunged at him, he ducked low, using its momentum to his advantage. The spear met its chest with a sickening crunch, the energy crackling as the creature let out a final painful screech. For a brief, fleeting moment, the arena went silent. Jack stood there, breathing heavily, the spear still lodged in the creature's chest. He couldn't believe it. It was dead. The beast was defeated. But the victory was short-lived. From the shadows, two more beasts appeared, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent red light. They were faster and larger than the first one. Jack's stomach twisted. What was he supposed to do now? Elia's voice cut through the silence. "Jack, there's a trap." Before he could react, the ground beneath him shuddered, and the energy barrier around the arena flickered, sparking with unstable power. Jack barely had time to register what was happening before the air around him grew thick and heavy, like gravity itself had doubled in strength. His legs felt like lead, his movements slow and clumsy. "The arena is rigged," Elia shouted. "You're not just fighting the beasts, you're fighting the environment too." The new beasts charge, their claws scraping the floor with an ear-splitting screech. Jack barely had the strength to lift the spear again. The weight of the air was crushing him. He stumbled, his knees buckling under the pressure. Then, from the far end of the arena, he saw something, a glowing rune embedded in the floor. It pulsed with an eerie light, as if it were alive. Jack's eyes locked onto it. The rune. It was the key to ending this madness. With every ounce of strength he had left, Jack pushed himself toward the center of the arena, ignoring the pain in his limbs. The beasts were closing in fast. One of them swiped at him with its claws, shredding his jacket, but he didn't stop. The rune was within reach. Come on," Jack muttered under his breath, sweat dripping down his face. He reached the glowing rune and slammed his fist into it. The arena shook violently, the air around him crackling with energy as the beasts froze mid-strike. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the beasts vanished into thin air. Jack collapsed to the floor, his body giving out from exhaustion. The pressure around him eased, the gravity returning to normal. He lay there, gasping for breath, unable to move. He couldn't believe it. He had done it. He had survived. But his victory was short-lived. From the shadows, a new figure stepped forward. A tall, imposing figure, draped in black armor that shimmered with dark energy. A figure that Jack recognized all too well. It was the same man from earlier, the one who had sat on the High Council, the one who had condemned him to this trial. "I see you've proven yourself, human," the figure said, his voice like gravel. "But this is not over. Not by a long shot." Cliffhanger. As the figure approaches, a deadly smile spreads across his face, and Jack realizes he has just stepped into a new nightmare, far worse than any beast. The dark conspiracy. Jack couldn't catch his breath. His body ached from the trial, the aftermath of fighting not just the beasts, but the very laws of the arena. He had survived the trial of honor, but as he lay on the cold, stone floor of the arena, he felt the oppressive weight of his surroundings. Victory felt hollow, and the heavy silence that followed only deepened his unease. He wasn't allowed to rest for long. The armored figure from earlier, the one who had condemned him to the trial, stepped forward, his boots echoing against the stone. His black armor glinted ominously in the dim light, and his shadow stretched long across the arena floor. "You've done well to survive, human," the figure said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you still don't understand what you're up against." Jack slowly pushed himself up, feeling the sting of his muscles. "What's your game? Who are you?" The figure's lips curled into a cold smile. "You've met the High Council, but you haven't seen the real power in Zephoria. I am the one who truly controls this kingdom. Lord Kale, leader of the Shadow Court." Lord Kale's name echoed in Jack's mind. He had heard whispers of the Shadow Court, a faction within Zephoria that operated in the shadows, pulling strings behind the scenes. The council had always spoken of them with fear, but no one had dared to explain exactly who they were, or why they were so dangerous. "The High Council doesn't control Zephoria," Lord Kale continued. "They only serve as puppets for my ambitions, and now you, human, have been drawn into our little game." Jack's mind raced. Everything was a lie. The princess, the trial, the creatures. They were all part of something much bigger, something he didn't yet fully understand. But he was tangled in it now, and he couldn't back out. "You're not leaving Zephoria." Lord Kell's voice was cold and final. "I've already made sure of that." Suddenly, the energy barrier around the arena dropped, and the sound of approaching footsteps filled the space. Jack tensed, preparing for another attack. But the footsteps were different, heavy, deliberate, as if they carried the weight of the kingdom itself. A new figure stepped into view, a tall, regal woman draped in flowing red robes. Her eyes were a piercing green, and her presence radiated an undeniable authority. It was clear she wasn't here by accident. Elia's eyes widened as she saw the woman, and a flicker of recognition passed between them. "Queen Selene," Elia whispered, her voice tight. Lord Kell's lips curled into a smile. "Ah, yes, the one who thinks she can stop me. The rightful queen of Zephoria. Elia's dear mother." Elia's face went pale. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Queen Selene stepped forward, her eyes sharp and calculating. She didn't even glance at Elia, her attention fixed solely on Jack. "You've caused quite a stir, human." Her voice was smooth, almost too smooth. "But I think you've made a mistake." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Queen Selene's lips curled into a subtle smile. "The trial was never about your worth, Jack Carter. You've been used, a pawn in a much larger scheme." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What the hell are you talking about?" Lord Kell chuckled darkly. "You see, human, Elia's return wasn't just about saving her life. It was a trap for you. The moment you saved her, you were marked. You're linked to our conflict now, whether you like it or not." Jack took a step back, his mind racing. "You wanted me to get involved. That's why you let me save her." Queen Selene's smile turned icy. "Exactly. You're not the hero you think you are, Jack Carter. You were chosen. By fate, by us, by powers you can't even begin to understand." Elia's voice cut through the tension. "No, Mother, this isn't the way. You're not the queen I thought you were." Queen Selene's face hardened. "I am the true ruler of Zephoria. And soon, so will my plans for this kingdom come to fruition. You've made your choice, Elia. And Jack, well, you're already too deep." Cliffhanger. Just as Jack opens his mouth to argue, the ground trembles violently, and the air fills with the sound of heavy machinery. From the shadows, a massive warship emerges, its engines roaring as it approaches the palace. Jack's eyes widen. They'd brought the full force of the Shadow Court. The war has begun, and Jack is now caught in the heart of it. Betrayal and war. The palace ground shook once more, and the roar of engines filled the air. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he looked up to see the massive warship descending toward Zephoria's floating capital. It was like something out of a nightmare, dark, sleek, and armed to the teeth, with jagged spikes along its hull that seemed to bite into the air itself. The Shadow Court's forces had arrived, and they were ready for battle. Elia's expression hardened, her fear shifting into resolve. "It's begun." She spoke with a quiet certainty, but Jack could hear the underlying edge of panic in her voice. Queen Selene smiled, her eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction. "It's time. The Shadow Court's warships are the key to Zephoria's dominance. No more hiding, no more waiting. This kingdom will be reborn." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. So this was the plan. To use the warships to crush any remaining resistance and take complete control of Zephoria. Queen Selene didn't just want the throne. She wanted to rule the entire galaxy. Suddenly, a loud, echoing voice boomed from the palace speakers, a voice filled with the authority of centuries of command. To the people of Zephoria, the voice said, cold and calculated, "The time has come. The Shadow Court is here to claim what is rightfully ours. We shall erase the past and build a new world, a world ruled by those who understand the true meaning of power." Jack looked at Elia, who seemed to shrink beneath the weight of her mother's words. "She's turning everyone against me," Alia whispered, her voice trembling. "She's making them believe Zyphoria is better off under her rule." Jack's gut twisted. Alia's mother had just declared war. And worse, she had made sure the people of the kingdom were ready to follow her into battle. Alia had just become the enemy in her own home. But it wasn't just Alia who was in danger now. Jack was a marked man. If Queen Celine's forces thought for 1 second he was a threat to her power, they would kill him without hesitation. "They can't do this," Jack growled, stepping forward. "You can't just control everything with fear." Queen Celine's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. "Fear is the only thing that binds the galaxy together, human. It's the only force strong enough to create order." As the warship descended closer, a heavy blast shook the ground beneath them. Jack's eyes snapped toward the horizon, where the first wave of enemy troops was already emerging from the ship. They were an army of soldiers, drones, and mechanized war beasts. Their armor glistened darkly, and their weapons hummed with lethal energy. The war had started. Alia turned to Jack, her face filled with a mix of determination and fear. "We have to move. The palace will fall within hours. The Shadow Court is too powerful. We need to get to the inner chamber, where the true heart of Zyphoria's power lies. If we can control that, we can stop this madness." Jack shook his head. "I can't just run. I need to fight. This is my mess now too, Alia." But Alia didn't give him time to argue. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a nearby corridor. "Trust me, Jack. If we don't get to the chamber, everything will be lost. You're not just fighting to save Zyphoria now. You're fighting for your own life." Before Jack could respond, the palace doors behind them exploded inward, sending a wave of debris into the air. Soldiers poured in, their weapons blazing as they flooded the hall. "This is it," Jack hissed under his breath, instinctively reaching for a nearby weapon rack. He grabbed a laser rifle and checked it quickly. It was crude, untested, but it was the only thing he had. Alia didn't hesitate. She turned, firing at the advancing soldiers with precision, her movements graceful but lethal. Jack couldn't help but stare for a moment. Alia wasn't just a princess. She had become a warrior, fighting for her survival in a kingdom she no longer recognized. But the enemy was closing in fast. They had to move. "Follow me." Alia's voice cut through the chaos, her command unmistakable. She darted forward, weaving through the hallways with Jack hot on her heels. The city was in chaos. Screams echoed from every direction, the sound of combat and destruction flooding the palace. Jack couldn't believe how quickly it had all fallen apart. One moment, he was a hero. The next, he was a fugitive. They turned a corner, and Jack found himself face to face with a group of elite soldiers, cloaked in the sigil of the Shadow Court. Their helmets gleamed with dark energy, their weapons pointed directly at them. Jack didn't have time to think. He fired first, taking down 2 of the soldiers with well-aimed shots. But the others were quick, faster than he had anticipated. A soldier lunged toward him with a bladed weapon, but Jack rolled out of the way, just in time to avoid being struck. Alia leaped into the fray, her blades flashing as she fought side by side with Jack. Together, they pushed forward, slicing their way through the advancing soldiers with a brutal efficiency. But this was just the beginning. Behind them, the warship's engines roared, signaling the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The battle for Zyphoria was only just starting, and Jack had a feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Cliffhanger. As Jack and Alia reach the inner chamber, they are stopped by Lord Kell himself, standing at the entrance with a dark smile. "You really think you can stop me?" he sneers. "You're already too late." A human's final stand. The inner chamber of Zyphoria was more than just a room. It was a symbol of power. Its towering walls were adorned with intricate alien symbols, glowing with faint blue light, and at the center stood a massive crystalline structure that seemed to hum with energy. This was the heart of the kingdom's power, the ancient source of its might. And now, Jack and Alia were standing before it, surrounded by the chaos of war. Alia stepped forward, her eyes locked on the crystal. "If we control this," she whispered, "we can turn the tide. We can stop my mother, stop Lord Kale, and save Zyphoria." Jack didn't have time to think about the deeper meaning of the crystal. His mind was clouded with one thought: survival. There was no turning back now. Lord Kale had cornered them, and Alia was right. This was their last chance. They had to take control of the crystal before the entire city fell into the hands of the Shadow Court. As Jack reached for his blaster, a chilling voice echoed from the shadows behind them. "You think you can stop me?" Jack spun around, his heart racing. There, standing in the doorway of the inner chamber, was Lord Kell himself. His black armor gleamed, and his eyes shone with a malevolent light. "I told you," Kell continued, his voice low and dangerous. "You're already too late. The Shadow Court is inevitable. Zyphoria will fall. It's just a matter of when." Alia stepped forward, defiant, but her voice wavered. "No, Kell. I won't let you destroy everything. This isn't your kingdom to take." Lord Kell's lips twisted into a sinister grin. "This has never been about kingdoms. It's about power. And now, it's mine." Jack's fingers tightened around his weapon. He had no idea how to fight this man, this being who seemed more machine than flesh, but he wasn't about to let Alia face him alone. "You've always hidden in the shadows, Kale," Jack called out. "You never had the courage to face anyone directly." Cal's smile deepened. "Courage? I don't need courage. I need control." Suddenly, the crystal in the center of the room glowed brighter, its energy crackling and pulsing like a living thing. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and Jack's blood ran cold. Something was happening. A low hum filled the air as the crystal's power reached its peak. Lord Kale raised his hands, and the very energy of the room shifted, twisting around him like a vortex. A dark, shadowy force began to form at his fingertips. "This is the end." Kale's voice was calm, almost soothing, as though he were narrating a well-rehearsed story. "The Shadow Court's reign begins here." In that moment, Jack understood. Kale wasn't just a political figure. He was tied to this crystal, to Zyphoria's power. The crystal was the source of his strength, and he had learned to harness it. Jack wasn't facing just a man. He was facing the very essence of this kingdom's future. Alia's voice cut through the tension. "No, this power is not meant for you." She lunged toward the crystal, her hands glowing with a strange inner light, but Cal's shadowy energy pushed her back, sending her crashing into the stone wall. "Alia!" Jack shouted, rushing to her side. But as he turned, his gaze fell on the crystal again. Its glow was more intense now, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. His eyes locked onto Kull, who was now surrounded by a swirling vortex of shadow. The room was thick with darkness, and the air felt heavy. There was no escape. "You really think you can stop me?" Kale mocked. "You're nothing. Just a human with no power." Jack's fingers trembled as he gripped his blaster. No powers, no special abilities, no alien strength. Just him, in a place where the very fabric of reality seemed to bend at Cal's will. But Jack wasn't about to give up. In that instant, something deep inside him shifted. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. He was fighting for Alia's future, for Zyphoria's future, and for everything that had been taken from him when he stepped into this galaxy. He wasn't powerless. "You're wrong." Jack's voice rang out, defiant. "I'm not like you." As Cal turned to face him, Jack fired his blaster, aiming for the crystal. But the energy surrounding it deflected the shots, sending them spiraling harmlessly into the air. Kale laughed, the sound like a thunderstorm on the horizon. But Jack didn't stop. He dropped the blaster and charged toward the heart of the crystal, relying on instinct. His breath came in ragged gasps as the air around him thickened with dark energy, but he kept moving. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a human, and humans were resilient. As he reached the crystal, he placed his hand on it. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent, except for the whispering hum of the energy surrounding them. Then, the crystal cracked. A blinding light erupted from the heart of the stone, engulfing the room in a wave of raw, untamed power. Cale screamed, his body writhing as the light washed over him. The vortex of shadow collapsed, and for the first time, Jack could see the full shape of Cale's true form, a twisted, corrupted being, a monstrous fusion of machine and alien. Jack pushed forward, using every ounce of his strength, and the light consumed everything. When the light finally faded, the palace was eerily still. Jack fell to his knees, breathless, his body exhausted, but the battle was over. Cale was gone. The Shadow Court's reign had ended. Elia slowly stood, her eyes wide with disbelief. She walked toward Jack, her steps uncertain, but as she reached him, she extended a hand to help him up. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet awe. Jack smiled weakly, his eyes focused on the empty throne at the heart of Zephoria. "I didn't do it alone," he said, his voice hoarse. "We both did." And for the first time, Jack Carter felt like a true hero. Not because of the battle he fought or the enemies he faced, but because he had changed the fate of a world. Cliffhanger. As the sun rose over Zephoria, painting the sky with shades of gold and violet, Elia turned to Jack. "Now what?" Jack glanced at the horizon, where the future of a new Zephoria awaited them. "Now we rebuild."